Welcome to Cities Connect, where we discuss issues that matter. Cities Connect is an ongoing weekly series featuring presentations by subject matter experts on a variety of topics. Each of these presentations has been specifically created for Georgia's city leaders and provides information designed to benefit municipalities and their residents. We appreciate you watching this episode of Cities Connect, and we hope you enjoy the presentation.
Well, good morning. It's such a pleasure to be among some of the familiar faces. I see Mayor Ford for sure. We were together just a few weeks ago, so it's good to have some familiar faces when presenting. Today, we are going to move through a subject I'm sure that's pretty exciting to all of you, and a little brief training on generation gaps. I was enthused too, because I know that having 5 generations in the workplace can change the way we manage and the way we take care of our people. So I'm going to move through. I've taken a 4-hour training session and condensed it down to about 40 minutes, but I think you'll get a lot out of today. So without additional conversation, let's get started. I want to start first with, the whole thing around generation gap. Okay. And generation gap basically use, the values and attitudes that differ from one generation to another. So it really got started during the 60s. The term generation gap was used to describe sort of the clash between parents and kids. There were the traditionalists, and then the baby boomers, and then, generations after generations came, and now they're in the workplace. All 5 generations are in the workplace. And now we have to learn how to intermingle and work with each other for the success of the organization. So today, what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to first go through the different generations in the workplace, and I'm going to define what a generation is and what effect, this will have in the workplace. So here we go. First, the generations that exist in the workplace, you can see are 5. And since many older workers are on the job longer and living longer, and a lot of workers are entering the workplace right out of college, our workplace is fragmented. It's fragmented with a lot of different generations. Now, in order for you to understand, this environment, it's necessary that you understand, what generations present in today's workplace. We're all living a lot longer. We're living. The average age now, we could live up to is 77 to 80 years. So we're going to find 5 potential generations in the workplace today. And as you can see, those are traditionalists, baby boomers, Generation X, Gen Y, which is also called the millennial generation, and Gen Z. Okay, so 5 different generations. We're going to try to understand the background, the attitudes, and the work styles for each generation, because that's really essential, especially for managers and supervisors, to understand those different generations in order to effectively coach them, right? So before we delve into that, let's take a look at what defines a generation. A generation is a group of people born during the same period who may share similar attitudes and values. So the 5 generations mentioned in the previous slide they have specific time ranges that define their period. So for example, the traditional generation represents people who were born before 1945. And then the baby boomers came. They were born between 46 and 1964. Generation X represents, those folks who were born between 1965 and 1980. Generation Y represents those born between 81 and 97. And then Generation Z, they were born between 1998 and 2015. Now, these are general overviews. There may be some overlap, maybe just a little bit of differences in terms of those, but that's basically the area, the times that they were born, and that's how we separate those different generations. Okay. So what does that mean in the workplace, right? So, when groups share similar values and attitudes and communication styles and interpersonal dynamics, things tend to run pretty smooth, right? But when you have all different styles working together and different attitudes, of a multi-generational group, that could cause some tension. even from employee to employee. It can cause interacting with each other different because each generation, you're going to find, they communicate differently. Okay? We understand each other differently. The way we handle conflict is different. So the generation gap between employees, it becomes an issue. From a manager perspective, there's differences in ways generations communicate, how they view authority, how they feel about work-life balance. Okay. So the manager has to be really knowledgeable about the traits of each particular generation. And they almost have to create a plan to address those issues proactively. All right. So generations, those gaps at work, they do require effort, and they're going to require a need for us to cultivate a more of an inclusive environment now that represents each generation. So now we're going to move through the different generations. The traditionalist generation is the oldest generation you may encounter at work. The average age, okay, is anywhere from 70 and 80s. Now, most traditionalists have retired, but there still are few in the workplace. So again, there is the traditionalists. These are our most senior people in the organization. Let's look at a little bit of their background. The background of the traditionalists, they were born before 1945. So they may have subsequently experienced the Great Depression, or at least their parents experienced Great Depression, and probably their parents lived through World War I. So the traditionalists, they tend to have values, very strong values. They were brought up during tough times when there was a scarcity of resources. There were a lot of economic troubles. Okay. The traditional values in terms of family structure and gender, they were influenced primarily by this generation. So generally in the traditionalist household, the male would dominate the workforce, the women took care of home. All right, so this was kind of their background. That formed a lot of things about their character and their working style. Let's take a look right quickly. Their character, traditionalists are considered hardworking. They grew up during a time when having a job was a privilege. They tend to be very loyal to their employees, and they don't jump from job to job. They're willing to work long hours. They believe that work is the way to earn a better position in the company and to secure a quality lifestyle. Traditionalists also tend to be very accommodating because they were raised to respect authority. Let's look at their working style. Traditionalists compose about 2% of the working population, 2%. But they bring a real strong work ethic to the workplace, really dedicated to the employer. They value leadership and hierarchy. Again, you can see some of their characteristics. They like to be recognized for hard work. They view work as a team effort. They tend to avoid conflict, and they may struggle with technology. So that's basically their working style, the traditionalists. About 2% still exist in the workplace. Let's look at the baby boomers. The boomers came at the end of the Second World War between 46 and 64. This was when birth rates really soared. About 77 million children were born in the United States during this period. So that's why the term baby boomers. Let's look at their background. Again, they grew up in a period, what we call a period of innocence. It was during the 50s, okay? And they saw their model lives portrayed on television. This is when television was really emerging. Mothers began working out of the home, and television became a large component of the baby boomers' upbringing. As they moved through the 60s, their generation was becoming more and more defined. They experienced a lot of social changes, like the civil rights, a different kind of war in Vietnam. And then you started seeing more rebellion against the establishment, like the hippie revolution. You remember the hippies? So the baby boomer generation, they kind of represented a departure from tradition and a movement more to changes in society, beliefs, and attitudes. This is where it got started. Let's look at their character. They were exposed to a changing world where challenging the established culture was the norm. It was the norm. They were willing to confront and challenge the status quo. But baby boomers were exposed to more than usual resources than the past generation. They're hardworking. They define themselves as their careers and their profession. Baby boomers are disciplined. They mirror a lot of their traditionalist parents' ethics. So again, this is a hardworking generation, that believe, that feel the younger generations, should share their beliefs, regarding professional choices. Boomers also tend to criticize what they see as a lack of work ethic. Now, the boomers still make up 25% of the current work population in the United States. And the oldest in this generation right now in the workplace would be about 75. They're either working, retired, or working just fewer hours. But still, we have 25% of the boomers still there. Their working style, baby boomers have been defined as and called work-centric. They're hardworking. They're motivated by incentives. We tend to work, and I say we because I'm a part of that generation, tend to work long work weeks and may be considered workaholics. They feel their drive should be shared by everyone if they expect to succeed in their own characteristics. Their working style, as you can see, they're career focused. They think work makes a difference. They're competitive and they're resourceful. Let's move on to this next generation called Generation X. Generation X they were born between the years 1965 and 1980. This generation is sometimes referred to as the latchkey generation. Remember hearing that term? A little bit of their background, they were born between 65 and 80, and they were born right around the time we started to have a decline of the baby boom after the post-war era. So populations of babies were starting to decline during this era. Now, Gen Xers, they lived during the time when the country was shifting from a manufacturing type or a country to more of a servicing type country. So their generation grew up with technology as a part of their lives. They experienced the arrival of the internet, computers, video games, cell phones, email. It's all been a part of Gen X's lifestyle. They have seen the evolution of technology and they understand the origins of all of that. But Gen Xers also experienced difficult times in the 80s because remember in the 80s, we had a real economic downturn. So Gen Xers learned to live in tough times as well. And finally, Gen Xers, they were raised pretty much in two-income home or single-parent homes, one of the two. And that situation forced many Generation Xers to be placed in daycare centers. So this was kind of another shift that's caused them to be who they are. Their background allowed them to develop new characteristics that was different from their parents. They started seeing a different type person from the baby boomers. So that was the background, their character. Gen Xers, they're pretty individual people. They're very individualistic. They're very independent. They're very self-sufficient, and they're flexible. They're probably also more diverse and better educated than the previous generation. More than half of the Gen Xers attended college. So they believe that there's a balance between the workplace and home life. They feel stronger about that than the previous generation as well. Okay, they prefer to work. They prefer to work. They enjoy family, and they look for jobs that allow flexibility in their schedules. And so you're going to begin to see the swing toward work-life balance here with Gen Xers. Gen Xers they're more likely to try new things because they have some technical experience. Gen Xers also tend to welcome new technology in the workplace. And they tend to really adapt to new technology quicker than the previous generations. They tend to be very tolerant of other lifestyles, and they accept change in their environment better than the previous two generations. So Generation X, their perspective, give them a chance to foster a more accessible environment at work. So let's talk about their working style. You see the caption on the slide says, this generation does not do well in micromanaged environments. Gen Xers are about 33% of the workforce today. They crave responsibility, but they sometimes reject authority and work schedules. You may have seen that. They do not like being in a micromanaged environment. They tend to thrive in a workplace where management allows them the freedom, more freedom to complete their task without too much supervision. So Gen Xers, they take advantage of technology and they incorporate it in their work. And they see technology as a tool to do things more efficiently. So that's our Gen Xers. But, you can also see that Gen Xers, they're not as connected to their employers as their previous generation, but they do adapt well to change in the workplace, and they also drive change, the Gen Xers. And then finally, this generation, they probably have the better balance between work and their personal life. Okay, they like to have fun at work. Okay, they believe in a work hard, play hard ideal. So this generation, they like a dynamic, they like a changing environment, okay, that challenges them. So that's our Gen Xers. Let's look at now the Gen Y, or the millennial generation. The Gen Y millennial generation, they were born between 81 and 97, and they're considered what we call the entitled generation, okay? Let's talk about why. 35% of the current workforce today is comprised of Generation Y, or the millennials. They're the fastest growing portion in the workplace. Okay? They were raised with technology as a normal part of their life. They can't remember a time when there was not a computer or a cell phone or some electronic device in their everyday life. They can't remember that. They thrive on electronic communication, and they prefer electronic communication over face-to-face communication. They also prefer using the internet as a means of making purchases. They've been exposed to just vast amounts of information in music, and they can even be credited. They've been credited with the selfie, the selfies now. The millennials, they're the one who started that, right? They were exposed to more group interactions as they came up in play groups, team sports than previous generations. And that was due in part, to their parents had higher education, more money, and were able to provide them with a better lifestyle. The millennials, they're really about getting what they want when they want it. They're more about, I want it now. That's that generation. The speed of technology and information, that kind of helped them to believe that they could have everything very quickly and very efficiently. A little bit about their character, okay? They're very family-centric. They value family over work. This generation relies a lot on technology to do their jobs. They expect to have those resources available when they need them. They tend to be very confident and kind of achievement-oriented. This generation will challenge your ideas and motives, and they'll question authority much more than previous generations. They see work as necessary, but they're more open to life learning. They like to learn through living. They work well in a work environment. They do seek reinforcement from others, okay? And sometimes you'll find that this particular generation, they appreciate feedback, and they want a lot of feedback. They need more feedback than the previous generations, and they appreciate periodic recognition for their work. Okay, so these are some characteristics, of this particular millennial group. Their working style, it is also different from those of previous generations. This generation is motivated by benefits like flexible scheduling. They're less motivated by money. Now, they like money, but they're less motivated by money. They call attention to themselves by suggesting ideas and challenging the status quo. So be ready for that. Again, family is first, and they will resist anything that crosses the line that puts family second, including the work schedule. They're not happy working long hours. Now, that does sometimes send the message that they don't care or they're lacking discipline. And that's not really true. It's just that their values are different. This particular generation, they work with the employer well. They seek to be included, though, in important activities and work. When they don't find that they're included or feel inclusive, they tend to leave and look for a better professional fit. So this is the millennials. And the last generation we're going to describe is the Generation Z. There are approximately 68 million Generation Z in the US who were born between 1998 and 2015. And like the previous generations that we discussed, they also have a distinct personality, different background, character, and working style. Let's look at the background. So if the Gen Y millennials reach adulthood around the year 2000, the Generation Z population might be considered post-millennials. Now, these post-millennials, they make up about 20% of the US population, 5% of the workforce. But this generation, they pump about $44 billion into the economy. So that's good reason to learn more about that generation. They're also known as centennials. They are the most ethnically diverse generation out of all the generations. They grew up with internet phones, social networks. They mirror Generation X. They kind of, as far as their political and social values, they mirror the generation that came before them, and they contribute, again, billions to the economy. A little bit about their character. Generation Z population, they have their own characteristics. They're very global. They're concerned because they have so much access to information. They're much more involved globally than previous generations. They have very high expectations. They have high standards for what they spend their time and their money on. If a product is not delivered well enough or the quality that they're experiencing, they'll change quickly. They tend to be very much self-starters. Now, what research is showing that the rate of business startups is much greater with this generation. A lot of these kids are now starting businesses before they graduate. They strive for uniqueness. They want to be recognized. They want to stand out from everybody else. They want to be recognized. Their working styles, they've been criticized as being less focused and having shorter attention spans than those predecessors. Now, again, this age group was raised with instant gratification from technology that delivers real-time results. However, they are multitaskers. They tend to be very much multitaskers. Okay, and they've been very good at completing many tasks at the same time using different types of technologies. Okay, you've seen a lot of them. While they're talking on a speakerphone, while posting a YouTube video or ordering stuff off of Alexa from Alexa. So they can multitask very well. Many times at home, these generations often choose on furthering their education. They often live at home and they choose to further their education. They have a real strong need for individuality, as I said earlier. Okay, and they want their accomplishments to be seen in the workplace. They're very flexible and very independent starters. So I've talked about the 5 generations. Now, what I really want to do is let's talk about now, how do we manage those differences? How do we manage? That's the real piece of the work, right? Because it's reality. So now we understand a little bit about each generation. Now we're going to compare those differences and learn the differences between the generation gaps based on background, attitude, working style, and life experience. So first, let's take a look at the differences in background. Now, the background differences among the generations, the main factor in those differences is the effects on the technology has had on people. The understanding of technology is the main difference among the generations. You see, the traditionalists had very little exposure to things like computers and social media, and things that we take for granted. So even some baby boomers struggle with technology, right? We tend to use it only as needed, usually only at work. But on the other hand, generations X, Y, and Z, they grew up with technology and is more a part of their daily life. Technology changed the way we communicate. So in the workplace, some people like verbal communications. Some people just text me. So, and that could be seen as either an advantage or disadvantage. For example, a generation could become very easily frustrated with the older generation when their counterparts struggle with technological issues. So media has also been an effect on the different generations. Television, computers, internet, smartphones, all of those things conflict with the different generations because different generations were exposed at different times. On the other hand, though, the older generations are relying on human interaction more. We still like to have a conversation. The younger generations, they don't, not always. While an older generation may prefer to speak with a coworker face to face, again, the younger would rather text, instant message their conversation. Social events, same thing. Okay. Traditionalists lived through a period when socialization had an effect on their lives. Okay. Boomers experienced the revolution of the 60s, which opened the door to change society. Gen Xers, they enjoy the benefits of change, but they've not lived through a lot of dramatic or social change. We need to understand how technology and the media has really affected each particular generation. Another thing that was affected by all this is the attitudes. The attitudes among the generations are different. This has come because of their background, and each generation interacts with others during their time. Attitude toward authority is another one. You notice now you have to spend more time helping them understand why. Well, as the generations progressed, the attitude toward authority is that they're going to challenge you. You can expect to be challenged more now. Some of the generations, the older generations, we were taught to accept and move forward. It's changing now. So as the decades with generations, as it advanced, we rebelled more. We created an attitude that challenges the status quo much more by the younger generation. Attitudes toward individuality with younger generations is common now. They came up during a time when their parents worked outside of the house and they were sending them to daycare, and it taught them to be more individualistic, more independent. The older generations, seeks to work with groups and think of others as they would think of themselves. Loyalty is another issue. Loyalty to the employers with older generations is more likely, and they're also more likely to remain with one employer, if that's possible. Some of the generations believe that, their job is their reward, right? The older generations, we feel like, we're rewarded by our jobs. The younger generations are not as loyal. They see changing employers as an opportunity to advance their careers by themselves. So the individual perspective is much more prevalent in the younger generation. Now let's compare those working styles. We talked about 5 different ones. And as we learned about the background and the attitudes, we see a pattern around working styles. The pattern includes things like flexible hours, right? The younger generation, they value flexibility. They want the workday to end to attend personal things. They value their family over their work life, and they expect their employer to provide arrangements that will allow them to work and manage their life. So there's quite a contrast here. The older generation, they see hard work, they work hard, and they see a clear separation of work and family life. They value their jobs and the work hours as a fixed thing per day. They expect to work 8-10 hours a day. So you see the mix that you've got in there. Challenging the status quo, again, younger generations, they see that as okay. The older generation is more compliant. They see challenging the status quo as disrespecting authority. Even around motivation, we say, how do we motivate these kids? They're not motivated. what motivates generations differ greatly. Okay? The older generation values a work environment where conformity is valued. They're great team members. The generation is motivated by achievement and will basically work to have an environment of competition, the younger folks. They like competition, which may be threatening to some, right? So again, the working stock. Life experiences have had a tremendous impact on the various generations, okay? So the older generations have experienced hard times. They've lived without for a longer period, which taught them the value of hard work and respecting the basics like food and clothing. The boomers, they know what it's like to fight for civil rights, protest against the government. Okay, the younger generation did not see economic hard times. They were sheltered by their parents a lot, which kind of diminished a lot of the effects of what was real. From an entertainment standpoint, the older generation experienced entertainment as traditional, like the movies, okay, and non-televised activities. The younger generation, they grew up with video games, rides at amusement parks, all kinds of activities, okay? So again, technology came into play. For the younger generations, technology was a way of life. Okay. Generation X saw technology grow into their lives, and Generation Z never did without it. So there's a lot of things here that really impact the individuals. Let me move pretty quickly through this stuff. So how do we find common ground? And this is really what we want to do. We want to try to find common ground so that we can be productive in the workplace, so we can eliminate some of those issues. So how do we do that? I suggest 3 ways. First, find yourself a good communication strategy. You can create affinity groups, support groups. And the third is to share knowledge, okay? And I'm going to walk through those pretty quickly. But adopting a communication style, one that's to the point, okay? Because you remember, you got 5 different groups, and actually 2/3 of them prefer a certain way of communication. So be to the point, adapt your communication styles to who you're talking to, make yourself available. And again, be professional. I don't know if you saw the first slide that we started, but one of the women were dressed professionally. The other person, the younger person, they had holes in the jeans and sneakers that typified the contrast in the workplace. So know who you're talking to and adapt your work styles, but be professional, okay? Because the boomers and the traditionalists, they value that much more. And I say create an affinity group. Some things you can do is generate a newsletter, book club, try to find some organizations that support each group themselves, so that nobody feels like they're left out. Affinity groups really works well. And the biggest thing here is to share knowledge. People want to know what's going on. Form focus groups. If you don't know how people are feeling, form focus groups. Again, create a newsletter. Have an ideas box. Ask people what they think. Managing in this environment is totally different. So this is conflict management. Look, when you have 5 generations in the workplace, you will have more conflict. But here's something I would tell you that you're going to see. You're going to see younger bosses managing older workers. That's going to create an issue. You're going to see turnover, and a lot of things you're going to see is around our stereotypes of how we think people are. Okay, so let's first look at quickly younger bosses managing older workers. Use this technique. If you're a younger person managing an older person, acknowledge that person's experience. They bring a lot of value. Don't discount them just because they're older. Acknowledge them. Show care. Okay, show that you care. Become interested in them. Understand what they do. Think about their hobbies. Okay, show interest in their families. Listen to them when they talk, and then exchange ideas with them. Okay, with your older employees on issues. One of the things I always recommend, if I read this book and I adapted it, it's called a mentor relationship. typically where an older employee might learn something from a new employee, and they're paired together so that the new employee can also learn something from the older employee. It's called a mentor relationship. I strongly encourage it in the workplace. Again, have a plan when you talk to your folks. You can really avoid turnovers. Okay, have a plan when you talk to your people. Determine the values, prepare questions for them, ask questions, advocate. And again, I mentioned briefly breaking down the stereotypes. There's a lot of stereotypes that we have about each other from an ageism standpoint or whatever particular generation that you're in. It's not true, okay? It's not true. And it is definitely not absolute. The other thing you want to do is, look, when you have generations in the workplace, you're going to have conflict, okay? You're gonna have a lot of, but you got to acknowledge it. You got to acknowledge differences. You got to address it. You got to set expectations, and you got to provide coaching. Don't pretend that it's not there. It's only going to go from that smoke alarm into a fire alarm. Okay, so acknowledge it, address it, and set expectations and provide coaching. Treat each other as peers. I know that's kind of hard to do, but when you treat each other as peers, I use a model called the CARE model. You collaborate with them, you share knowledge, you acknowledge with them, you show respect, and you give them equal opportunities in the workplace. Okay, all right. So we're gonna wrap up here because I think my time is up, and I want to give a chance for a few questions. But this is just a quick overview of generation gaps, and I certainly hope that you found at least one thing that you didn't know before.
Johnny, really appreciate the presentation. I'll tell you what, it's educated me. In a sense, I thought I knew this, but you really put a different spin on it in this aspect. But I guess, and I'm a baby boomer, so otherwise, as I get older, I'm going to fade away. These Gen X, Ys, and Zs are going to be taking over. So otherwise, we just have to understand, communicate, and eventually understand that they're going to be taken over, and we're going to fade away. And the way they're working and doing things is what's going to occur in the future, per se. And I guess we've got to have some communication, lay on some knowledge to them in the process, that as things change, that they can maybe take some of the ideas and thoughts that we may have or experiences and utilize them to better manage and run their businesses, the workplace, and even grow and mature as they get older as well. So, but anyway, I guess that's my comment. It's excellent presentation. I really appreciate it. I took some notes on that. And thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor. And what you say resonates well because, I can remember when, I was I was the youngest generation in the workplace, and they said the same thing about us. They said, these people, they're different. They're not like we were. Traditionalists were saying that about us. And if you remember, we worked through that. And it's the same thing we're facing today. It's like, we can't freeze time. We can't, stop time from changing. And it's all about really managing change, right? It's how we move ourselves from, one time span to the other. And it's going to keep changing. And so we don't have a choice. It's either that or, we start conflicting with each other, and then nothing good happens when that occurs. So, but I appreciate your comments. Thank you.